What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and this past weekend saw one of the largest weekends for competitive 10th edition Warhammer 40k that we have on record. Now, in the past, I've looked at a composite look of lists that did well from the weekend past, and you guys seem to like that. So, what I may do in the future, and what I will do in this video, is go through the lists that are undefeated in the largest events for a weekend and discuss the interesting highlights. Now, I'm not going to do a deep dive into these lists. If you are interested in that, I do live stream on the YouTube channel every Tuesday for Tactical Tuesdays, and we dive into lists from every faction and just dozens of competitive compositions for Warhammer 40k, so please check that out. For the meantime, we're just going to be talking about the undefeated list. I'm going to try to keep it down to one list per faction that did well, and try to highlight some of the more off-meta factions that went undefeated or won their respective events. If you enjoy this style of content, please let me know down in the comment section below. Drop a like in the video, all that stuff. Subscribe to the channel if you want to, and let's dive in. Starting from the smallest events. Now, a faction after my own heart, Tyranids, got a couple W's this weekend, especially at smaller events. All of their wins were in 20-ish player GT level events, so none of the larger events, and that includes the Wargamer.lt. This was won by Konstantin Kosovek, who brought an invasion fleet detachment running a Hive Tyrant with a Stranglethorn Cannon, the anti-infantry blast weapon that they can equip, a Monstrous Bone Sword and Lash Whip alongside Old One-Eye. He also had 2 units of Barbgons in his list, 2 Biovores for their ability to score secondary objectives better than almost any other unit in the game, thanks to their ability to project Spore Mines 48 inches that can be counted for scoring, especially maneuver-style secondaries. 2 Carnifexes to go with Old One-Eye. He does grant them rerolls to hits, which makes up for their 4+ weapon skill, ballistic skill. These guys also rocking Stranglethorn Cannons alongside Bioplasma and Crushing Claws in melee, their big D6 +1 damage melee weapon, and all together that brings probably the most lethal melee threat that Tyranids have access to. We did see a lot of other melee threats in the list, however, with 2 Haruspexes and a Trigon alongside a lot of ranged attacks. An Exocrine to grant reroll 1s to hit against a target that it shoots at, a single Pyrovore to grant ignore cover, a Tyrannifex with an acid spray, 3 units of Zone Throps, only 3 in each of those, and a unit of Tyrant Guard with the Hive Tyrant. Altogether, relatively standard build from what we've seen from Tyranids, although lacking a little bit of the forward deploy that we often see with things like Lictors and Von Ryan's Leapers that have been becoming more popular. Moving on to another Xenos faction, we have Necrons, who took a win at the Fun-N-Games Summer GT, a 32-player GT in Blacksburg, Virginia. This one was actually podiumed twice by Necrons, who got both the first and second placement, but Andreas Hoffman, in this case, was the undefeated player. He brought an Awakened Dynasty detachment led by a Hexmark Destroyer with the Sovereign Coronal. That Hexmark Destroyer using its built-in lone operative to project its 6-inch aura of counts as being led by a leader model, thanks to that Sovereign Coronal enhancement, and making it extremely difficult to interact with just because of the fact that you can't shoot at the Destroyer itself. We also saw 2 Overlords, both with Resurrection Orbs and War Sight, 2 Technomancers with Canoptek Cloaks, and a Transcended Catan upgraded with Sempiternal Weave. This grants that Catan a 4+ Feel No Pain, which on top of its already having damage and 4+ invulnerable save, means that almost all of the damage that gets assigned to that Catan is ignored in some way or another. This makes this, while it is an expensive piece and doesn't hit particularly hard, incredibly difficult to deal with, and its ability to teleport around the table makes it excellent at completing secondaries. Necron reanimation abilities are buffed by a Reanimator, and we see a lot of utility units being brought as well. That with 3 units of Canoptek Scarab Swarm and a couple Locust Heavy Destroyers. Following that up, we have 2 units of 2 Cryptothralls. These guys are going to be assigned into Lichguard units that those Overlords and Technomancers are also going to join into. The Cryptothralls can take hits for the rest of the unit, since unlike characters, they are just added to the unit wholesale rather than being attached to it, and they have a 4+ Feel No Pain and can be reanimated even after all of the Cryptothralls in the unit are killed. So you can use your reactive reanimation additions to bring those Crypto Thralls back and use their 4+ Feel No Pain multiple times to take the heat off of the Lich Guard themselves. That's backed up by 2 Doomsday arcs for a lot of shooting, and altogether creates an incredibly well-rounded and extremely difficult to deal with Necron list. Next up, we start to get a little bit bigger, and we start to see some of the larger factions take the victories, starting with the London Open. Now, while this event had a large player cap, it ended up only running with 45 players. But of those 45, the top 3 were all playing Genestealer cults. And it's looking like Genestealer cults may end up actually being the #1 faction in the game, or at least #2 after Aeldari. The winner this time around was Jokul Johansson, playing an Ascension Day detachment. This included a Clamavus with Inscrutable Cunning. This grants the character and his unit the Infiltrator's ability, allowing them to deploy forward outside of their deployment zone and regenerate command points that are used on the unit. The Clamavus himself also projects a 12-inch anti-deep strike aura and can deal damage to enemies that fail battle shock tests around him. So with that Inscrutable Cunning, you can project that aura pretty far forward. We also have 2 Nexi, I guess. These allow for free stratagem usage and the usage of multiple stratagems on units around them. They are going to be assigned into units alongside 2 Primuses. The Primuses granting reroll to hits to whatever unit that they've joined. On top of that, we have 2 Reductus Saboteurs, one of them with Meticulous Planner, that allows you to use an Agents of Vect command point cost increasing effect on one of your opponent's stratagems. Those Reductus Saboteurs might be some of the most efficient characters in the game, having lone operatives so they can do all sorts of cool lone operative stuff like holding backline objectives or going and completing secondaries without worrying about being shot at or giving up assassination. Can use the grenade strat for free, have an indirect fire weapon, and a once per game ability to deal mortal wounds on an enemy within 12. We see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units of 10 Acolyte Hybrids with 4 demolition charges and a bunch of hand flamers in them, alongside another unit of 5. That demolition charge for a one-shot weapon is an incredibly efficient profile, and these Acolyte Hybrids do a lot more than just 150 points worth of damage once they deep strike in to throw them at their opponent. Backing that up, we also have 4 units of Neophyte Hybrids. These are units of 20 with 4 seismic cannons and 4 grenade launchers apiece. These things are the heart of Genestealer cult's power. You can concentrate a ton of buffs on them to make even their relatively mediocre shooting incredibly strong, giving them sustained hits, reroll hits from the Primus, ignoring cover from the detachment ability, +1 AP from the Achilles Ridge Runner, and +1 to wound from the Nexos's free stratagem. This makes 160 point unit hit well above its weight class, capable of killing 2 or 3 times its points value before finally going down, and with the Nexos attached, depending on the rule set that you're using, you can potentially overwatch multiple times a turn with these units with sustained hits and full rerolls from the Primus, making them incredibly strong. Once they're killed, the characters do go away, but the rest of the unit, thanks to that Cult Ambush, can then redeploy and enact the combo again, blowing up a bunch of enemy units multiple times. These Neophyte Hybrid units are incredibly difficult to deal with, and that is why we saw them get 2 undefeated records in this event with an X and 1 to take up 3rd place. And with that, we'll move back over the Great Briny Ocean to Denver, Colorado, where the Denver Flight Club July Open was run, a 66-player GT. This one was won by Ben Neal and his Imperial Knights, running a Noble Lance detachment, and a pretty spicy one at that. Unlike a lot of the Imperial Knights list we've been seeing previously, Ben decided to leave the Knight Castigators and other big shooting platforms at home, instead opting for 2 Cerastus Knight Lancers. These things have an insane melee profile. They have a baked-in 4+ invulnerable save without having to use rotate ion shields thanks to that big shield, and they get the tank shock stratagem for free when they charge, allowing them to do additional damage on top of that insane offensive profile. They also grant the ability to advance and charge to the 3 Armiger Warglaives, also in the list, which then, thanks to the Bondsman effect reflecting back on the Knight itself, also allows them to advance and charge. And with a high base movement, these things can cross the table in 1 turn very easily and get stuck into your opponent's lines, potentially on the top of the 1st turn. We also see a Knight Crusader bringing up the rear, this one bringing an Avenger Gatling Cannon and a Rapid Fire Battle Cannon. It is the Warlord, but there are no enhancements being spent event in this list. We also then have a Custodes Assassin to add some additional utility. This little thing has a Vect effect to make an enemy stratagem cost more. In fact, having an upgraded version of it that makes the stratagem cost more depending on the number of times you use it. So even once its cost is upgraded, it can continue to compound if your opponent decides to use the stratagem over and over and over again. We also have 3 Armiger Warglaives to be buffed by the Cerastus Knight Lancers and push up the table. The Knight Crusader can also buff them with +1 to hit with ranged weapons as well, and altogether making a fairly well-rounded, if highly aggressive, Imperial Knights list. Moving on, we also had the Show Me Showdown, a huge 100-player major that played 8 rounds in Kansas City, Missouri. This one was streamed over by our friends over at Wargames Live, so go check out their channel if you want to watch the event unfold in all of its glory. It used player place terrain and had some interesting concessions to block off the towering keyword, specifically allowing the players to elect one building that blocked not only line of sight thanks to the Ruin ability, but also true line of sight against towering and aircraft models. While we've seen Genestealer cards, Imperial Knights, and even Necrons dominate their own events, the Show Me Showdown was very much the Aeldari show, with after 8 rounds of combat concluded, the top 3 players all playing Aeldari, and with an Aeldari mirror match in the finals. The event was finally won with an 8-0 record by trainer Wolf, playing a Battle Host detachment, running an Autarch Wayleaper Warlord to give command point regeneration, a Farseer Skyrunner with the Phoenix Gem. Oftentimes, Eldar players will not include a unit that the Farseer can attach into, so there are no bodyguards for the Skyrunner, but with that Phoenix Gem, it can regenerate itself on a 2+, making your opponent not really want to shoot at it, despite the fact that it might be all by itself. We then also have the Incarn with its ability to teleport around the table when units die, making it very difficult to take objectives away from Aeldari armies, just because the Incarn can then jump onto the objective and secure it for the Eldar player, even if you've killed everything else on the objective. And with the lack of restrictions on acting after it teleports, you can even use it offensively to kill opponents' models with indirect fire or your long-ranged attacks, jump the Incarn into the middle of their army, and then charge and blow stuff up with it. For 270 points and a strong defensive profile, the Incarn is an absolute steal for Aeldari lists, even if they're not in Ynnari specifically. We then have a huge backbone of fire, 3 fire prisms, 3 hornets as well, rocking double bright lances, a single night spinner, 1 unit of 5 shadow specters, a unit that can move, shoot, and then move again, thanks to their fire and fade style ability, making them incredibly good at grabbing objectives and completing secondary missions. 2 support weapon D-cannon platforms, 2 individual warwalkers, again with 2 bright lances, bringing us to a total of 5 single vehicles with 2 bright lances apiece. So enormous amounts of single target high damage shooting to benefit from that battle host detachment ability that gives you a floating hit and wound reroll over the course of each of your shooting or fight activations. 2 units of warp spiders for their ability to move an immense distance thanks to their jump pack, and grab, again, those secondary objectives and ensure that not only is this list shooting you off the table, but also scoring those secondary missions incredibly quickly as well. That's a pretty solid strategy that has worked for Eldar players all the way through the edition so far, and did well for Trainer, going 8-0 and winning the 100-player event. Eldar is obviously an incredibly strong faction right now, and it's going to take a little bit of work to see them brought down off their pedestal. We'll see if it happens with some of the other factions getting more evolved with their technology, but I do think that Eldar are still probably sitting pretty at the top of the game. That said, we did have another large event take place this weekend that did not see Eldar compete quite as highly. The US Open Tacoma 40K GT. This was a massive 370-player event that played 8 rounds using the US Open Circuit's special pairing system. This typically breaks players down to a bracket at the end of the event and kind of caps their upwards mobility. So if you haven't scored super highly after round 4, it can lock you down into a bottom or mid bracket where you can't unfortunately get any additional placement. With that in mind, it had a couple of undefeated players, one of them running Necrons, but the #1 spot with the highest score was taken by Steve Trimble and his Adeptus Custodes. In fact, just like the other events that were dominated by a single faction, this event had Adeptus Custodes in the first and second place, with Hank Adams bringing up that podium spot with an Adeptus Custodes mirror match in the finals. Steve Trimble brought a Shield Host detachment, being led by a Shield Captain with the Ceaseless Hunter enhancement to allow his unit to reactive move once per game, a second Shield Captain, and Trajan Valoris. These were all attached into enormous units of Custodian Guard, each of those being 10 Custodian Guardsmen with 2 Presidium Shields, one of those running the Sentinel Blade, the other one with the Vexillus, to make the unit a massive OC3. Custodian Guards are an incredible combat unit. While they don't have the same defensive technology that a unit like Custodian Wardens do, they do have their Stand Vigil ability, giving them full wound rerolls when they're on objectives, one of the most powerful instances of this ability, and that is buffing their enormous number of attacks, 2 shots at ranged with the ability to shoot again once per game, or 5 attacks in melee, either with 1 damage Sentinel Blades or 2 damage Guardian Spears. Despite the fact that their strength isn't the highest with those full wound rerolls, they can be a significant threat to almost any profile that you run up against. And given that they are coming in units of 10, they're going to be making upwards of 50 attacks, not including the characters added to the units. So these guys are an absolute powerhouse when it comes to brawling over midboard objectives. Following that up, we have a unit of prosecutors, just some Bolter Sisters of Silence to act as a utility unit. Again, a Calidus Assassin for all of the reasons that we talked about before, and 2 Exaction Squads. These guys are Adeptus Arbites with a dizzying array of special weapons and abilities, but mostly are brought for the fact that you can bring an incredibly cheap Imperial Agent Retinue unit for 35 points, and they can, again, perform your secondary missions, be used as throwaway units so you don't have to sacrifice your expensive custodians, and also just hold objectives when you don't have custodians to do it for you. And that put Custodes as winning the largest 10th edition of Warhammer 40k event so far. Now, there were other GTs and events that went down this weekend. Again, I'll probably dive into all of those on my Tuesday shows, so please go check that out on the channel if you're interested in some more deep dives into the metagame of competitive Warhammer 40k. But until then, thank you for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to everybody who supports the channel over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, and YouTube channel members, Twitch subscribers. All you people are awesome. I love you very much. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.